The Book of Job. Who? Within the text of the Book of Job there lurks a mystery. The mystery of the disappearing and suddenly materializing characters. Exploring this mystery allows us some insight into the questions scholars have raised when seeking the book's author. First of all, there's the question of the character the Satan, or the accuser. In Hebrew, this character is named Hasatan, which implies a counsel for the prosecution in a legal context. But of most interest for our purposes, after making his case in the first 2 chapters, the accuser disappears. Given the overall structure of Job, where we have a prose intro, followed by a long poem, followed by a closing piece of prose, one might expect the accuser to reappear at the end. But he never does. As we delve further into the book's structure, we notice that the central poem itself follows a pattern. We have a speech by Job, followed by speeches from each of his 3 friends or advisors. Job speaks, then Eliphaz speaks, then Bildad speaks, and finally Zophar speaks. And this pattern repeats itself 3 times. Or does it? Not quite. In chapter 26, Job delivers his lines, but just when we expect Zophar to come in, he vanishes. So, we have 2 characters, the Satan and Zophar, mysteriously vanishing. But then that's not all, because just when we've got used to this structure that I've described in Job, in enters another character, Elihu, without any warning, and he offers up a monologue of his own. So we have 2 vanishings and an unexplained appearance. What are we to make of this? These mysteries have led to a great deal of scholarly debate about the composition of Job. Some people believe that the disappearances can be explained by saying that the book consists of an ancient folk story to which has been added a poem inserted in the middle, and part of this poem has been lost, explaining Zophar's disappearance. Then a later writer, trying to reinterpret the poem, give the theology a new slant, has inserted Elihu in to sum up the arguments, take it in his new direction. The problem with this hypothesis is that it's also widely agreed that the book of Job marks a high point for Hebrew poetry. This book is brilliant stuff. It's great poetry. And if it's so great, it makes more sense to suppose a single author, or at the very least a single editor, who knew exactly how to make great literature work. When? Treating the book of Job as a single piece of work does the most justice to the poetry, but it doesn't point us to exactly by whom or when it was written. Estimates for its date range from the 10th century BC to the 2nd century. And so we're left with 800 years from which to try and identify its date. And unlike the other books of the Bible, or most other books of the Bible, Job makes no references to historical events to help us out. One way of estimating its date is to look at the theme of suffering and ask when the Israelites might have been pondering such material. This could place it at some time during the Babylonian exile, but to complicate this estimate, the reference to heavenly beings in chapter 1 verse 6 is unique in biblical literature, and it's likely to be much older than the exilic period. So, what we do know is that Job is set in the land of Uz, which was not in Israel. And the character's only other mention in the Hebrew scriptures is in the book of Ezekiel, where Job is named in a list of righteous non-Israelites. The inclusion of Job in the Bible, therefore, points to the fact that the Israelites believed they could learn lessons from foreigners, as well as that righteous foreigners could have a relationship with their Israelite God. As we saw in Genesis, the Hebrew Bible is not all about exclusivity. Why? It's difficult to answer the questions who and when for the book of Job, But why is probably more straightforward. This complex and brilliant poem is a piece of philosophical wrangling with the question of why bad things happen to good people. In a way, it's fitting that we don't know when Job was written, because its theme of suffering is timeless. In Job, we also see how human rationalizations of suffering fail to provide answers to the problem. First, Job's 3 friends give up in their attempts, and then Elihu arrives with a new approach, which is equally futile. In the book of Job, the answer to the question of suffering is only found when we see the world as God sees it. A vision which the anonymous author of Job wonderfully captures in some of the most powerful poetry of the Bible.